There are a few things that I've remained consistent about over the years. There's a bunch of things I've changed my mind about, everything from my political orientation to feminism. One of the things that I have maintained almost the exact same position on over the years, although I probably write about my views differently than I did 10, 15 years ago, is pornography, of course. I was, one of the very few young feminists at the time to be anti-pornography, to be critical of the sex trade, to be critical of prostitution, partly because pornography is vile and disgusting. I don't personally enjoy it. I don't find it sexy. It doesn't turn me on. I find it repulsive. I find a lot of it traumatic. I'm not that interested in looking at other people having sex. I think that's weird. I'm not interested in strangers' genitals. But apparently, I'm one of the only ones in the world who feels this way. Since the advent of OnlyFans, though, of course, I get so many questions asking me, okay, what about OnlyFans? The girls are doing what they want. They're consenting. They're making choices. There's no pimps. They're not being forced. They're not being trafficked. This is empowering. Women are making good money. Who do you blame here? Where's the victim? I've never felt like pornography is all about victims. I mean, the reality is, of course, that there are millions and millions of victims in pornography. Trafficking is rife in pornography. Pornhub just had to remove 91% of its website because they were found to have been hosting videos of rape, trafficking, child abuse. So they were, hosting, distributing, making money off these videos. They knew they were there, and they could no longer skirt responsibility. So the reality of pornography is you don't know what you're watching. You don't know what you're looking at. You don't know how the woman feels on the other side of the camera. You don't know how much pain she's in. She's probably at very least uncomfortable. You don't know why she's there. You don't know her history, which is very likely to include molestation, sexual abuse, trauma. That's just, again, the reality of the sex trade. Most women, if not all women that you talk to in the sex trade, will tell you that they have a background of child abuse, that there's child abuse in their histories, molestation, sexual abuse. Most women in prostitution got into prostitution when they were underage, so you can say they're of age, they're over 18, it's all good, consenting adults, yada yada yada, because you don't want to feel guilty about your jack off material. I know, I get it, but most of them got into porn or prostitution when they were underage. Most of them got into prostitution when they were underage, and a lot of the stories that women will tell about how they got into prostitution, if you talk to women once they've left and feel more free to talk about these things and can reflect back on the realities rather than just trying to cope with it and deal with the reality that they're in, they'll tell you that, they were molested by a family member, a family friend, maybe mom's boyfriend, things like that. And that was part of the grooming process. This is how they learned they deserve to be treated. This became normalized for them. And so it was really easy to move from there into prostitution. They became an easy victim for pimps and traffickers and so on and so forth. But all that is to say, you don't know. You don't know what you're looking at. And that should make you uncomfortable. But, moreover, the impact on our culture is huge. Pornography is everywhere. It's unavoidable. And it's not just that young people are seeing pornography early because they're seeking it out, but because it's just there. You can't be on social media. You can't be on the internet without seeing porn. Boys are getting DMs from OnlyFans chicks and porn bots in their Instagram accounts. And so most kids now are seeing porn as young as 11 years old, sometimes earlier. And to me, that constitutes a form of child sexual abuse. Kids that young shouldn't be exposed to adult content in that way. This is, again, part of the grooming process. When men who predate on children want to groom those children to be more, to normalize their abuse, as it were, they'll show them pornography. This is a really common tactic that child predators use. So let's talk about OnlyFans. A lot of men online will come at me and say, well, these women are just as guilty as the men watching. You know, they're taking advantage of these men, and, you know, they're just as depraved. They're just as unethical. And I don't think things are black and white. I think that the men who use OnlyFans, who pay for subscriptions on OnlyFans, who pay girls to perform for them on OnlyFans, are disgusting and embarrassing. I think they're creeps. I think they're losers. So you can be mad about that all you want, but yeah, I think any man using OnlyFans is an embarrassing loser, and you should feel ashamed of yourself. I'm not against shame. I don't think shame is an inherently bad thing. Sometimes we need to feel shame about bad things we do if we want to stop doing them, if we want to change our lives. But I also think that the girls on OnlyFans are guilty. I also think that it's a very unethical choice. If you have a choice, if you don't have a choice, if you're being trafficked, and yes, there is trafficking that happens on OnlyFans, then you are a victim. But if you want to brag on the internet about making an empowered choice to be on OnlyFans because you're making so much money, you're an unethical person. Money doesn't equal ethics. Money doesn't even equal empowerment, unless we want to stop using the word empowerment as a positive thing. You know, when I think about female empowerment, I think of, you know, feeling confident and self-assured and independent and able to make good decisions and liking myself and feeling powerful in general, having good boundaries. For example, money can be a part of empowerment, but if you're going to do something unethical, it doesn't turn into an ethical thing because you get paid. That doesn't make any sense. People get paid for doing all sorts of horrific things. People get wealthy off of exploitation constantly. I mean, think about how slavery worked. Are those people all empowered? And then is that a good thing because they got wealthy by using slave labor? So these two individuals, one of whom I'd vaguely and unfortunately heard of, and another, Sophie Rain, who I'd never heard of, apparently have a beef. They're both OnlyFans chicks. And this Sophie Rain, who has a very young face and a very porny body, that's part of her appeal. She knows it. Let's not pretend otherwise, that men aren't into her and that she isn't making so much money. Apparently, she made $43 million on the platform in her first year. I can't confirm that, but this is what she says. Needless to say, she's made a lot of money, more than, 99.9% of the chicks on OnlyFans, most of whom make around $100 a month or less. She looks like she's, 15 or 16. This is what her face looks like to me. And then, yeah, she has a super hyper sexualized porny body. Men are always looking for the underage, barely legal category in pornography, so it's no wonder that she's very popular. She also claims to be a Christian and a virgin, so those are big porn tropes. I very much doubt that she's a Christian. I think that if she were actually a Christian or into her Christianity in any case, she wouldn't be making pornography on OnlyFans. I don't know if God would approve. But this Sophie Rain was criticizing this young woman named Bonnie Blue, who is going to have a very rough life after having allowed over 1,000 strange men to penetrate her in one day. I'm sure her body is suffering the consequences and did suffer the consequences for that. Her mental health certainly will suffer at some point. I'm sure it is already. I'm sure she's shut down to cope. This is what most women have to do in the sex trade. They have to disassociate. This is why I always say that these, sexualized women in pornography are not actually very sexual. I've talked to so many women who worked in the sex trade in various capacities as high-end escorts, worked on the street in the downtown East Side, all sorts of, in brothels all around the world. And they all say that they completely lost interest in sex. They didn't like men. They couldn't be in a relationship. They didn't desire sex. And that's because of the disassociation. You know, you're having sex with these men who are creepy and disgusting to you, who you don't want to be sleeping with, who are probably abusive to you. And even if they aren't abusive, I mean, just that experience of, and any woman will understand this. I don't know if men will understand it or not, but I know that women will understand what it feels like to have sex with somebody you don't want to have sex with, have sex when you don't want to have it. It feels really disgusting. Even if it's your boyfriend, if you really don't want it, and then you do it anyway, or you're somehow coerced into it, it's a really gross feeling. So to be doing that day in and day out, because that's how you make money, that's how you need to survive, you disassociate so that you can cope with that. And most of these women do it through drugs as well. You know, most of these women that I've talked to struggle with some form of addiction, or, and, you know, it turns you into a deeply messed up person to have to remove your mind from your body and soul on a daily basis. Needless to say, Sophie Rain criticized what Bonnie Blue was doing in this stunt, saying of OnlyFans, it's no longer woman empowerment, it's shock value. She's making a joke out of all of us. So OnlyFans has never been about female empowerment. She said that Bonnie Blue was harming the image of the platform. So the image of the platform isn't a good one as far as I'm concerned, unless you love prostitution and pornography. But if you love prostitution and pornography, then surely you're aware of what prostitution and pornography are. And what Bonnie Blue is doing is prostitution and pornography. And the reality of pornography is that when women start, they don't have to do much because they're fresh meat and they can be the virgins and the new girl. And if they want to maintain their career and stay in the industry, they have to do more and more extreme stuff to continue to get work and views and hits, and they get used up and spat out really, really fast for the most part. But if they want to stay in, they have to keep doing kind of grosser and more vile and more extreme and more abusive acts. It would be no different on OnlyFans. And the idea that Bonnie Blue doing exactly what happens in pornography, maybe there's not 1,000 men at once, but there have been stunts like this in the past, is harming the platform is funny, you know? So, you know, doing prostitution type things on camera, according to Sophie Rain, is ruining the platform that exists to sell prostitution and prostitution type things on camera. To be clear, I see pornography as a form of prostitution. These people are being paid to have sex. I don't see what the difference is, except there's a camera there. This was never about female empowerment. This was about selling pornography to men, just like every other pornography platform does. The women on there didn't build this space. It was built by the owners and the CEOs who make a lot of money off these girls who are selling their souls for $100 a month on the platform. Because the company takes a pretty large percentage of the girls' earnings, 20%, they function as a pimp of sorts. So Sophie Rain is young. I mean, most women in the sex trade are young. She's only 20 years old. She's clearly not very smart. None of these women seem to be. So she's probably a little bit naive, and she's probably coping, and she's taken this narrative of OnlyFans is about female empowerment, and what you're doing is totally empowering, and it's not gross, and it's not like regular porn or prostitution. It is. You know, when you're young, you want to feel empowered. You don't want to feel like a victim. So you tell yourself that things are empowering that aren't really empowering, whether that's sleeping around, acting slutty, doing porny things, selling sex, sending men nudes who you don't know, who don't respect you, who don't deserve photos of your body parts. You tell yourself that these things are empowering because you want to feel good about yourself. You don't want to feel bad about yourself. I get it. And frankly, third wave feminism has a big role to play in all of this. Third wave feminism, so modern feminism. I'm not talking about the second wave feminism of the 60s and 70s and 80s that criticized prostitution and pornography and fought for real issues and real rights for women in the workplace and in marriages and so on and so forth. Third wave feminism worked really hard to convince women that any criticism of anything even remotely associated with sex constitutes shaming. So when I was critical of things like BDSM, I would be accused of slut shaming or shaming people for their sexualities. BDSM is about sexualizing abuse, so I think we should be critical of it. I don't think it's a good thing to turn violence and abuse and dominance and pain into something sexy. I mean, if you like to do that in your house, then I guess go ahead. I'm not trying to make it illegal. But I think when we're talking about it in public, I'm not going to pretend that that's a normal and healthy and good practice. I don't think it is. And so third wave feminism turned anything that had to do with sex into something empowering. If you're making a choice, it's empowering, even if it's prostitution, even if it's pornography, even if it's abusive. And young women were told that OnlyFans was different. It wasn't like that old school exploitation, all those old school feminists were talking about. You're in charge of your own content, you're making your own money, and they bought into that. So now there's millions and millions and millions of young women on OnlyFans, again, making very little money for the most part. We hear about these Sophie Rains who are making millions and millions of dollars, but that's a real rarity. And, while we can say, this Sophie Rain person probably isn't the brightest star in the sky, I think she knows exactly what she's doing by marketing herself as a virgin and a Christian and as this kind of innocent girl, really. She knows that sells. She knows that's why these men are paying her. I think that the kind of sad reality is that these girls are being fed a message that they really embrace, and they aren't realizing that somewhere down the line, they're going to feel really regretful about what they're doing. And they're going to have to deal with the consequences, the emotional, mental, spiritual consequences of having, showed their most intimate body parts to a whole bunch of strangers on the internet, and they can't take that back. They can't take those images back. Once it's out there, it's out there. Even if you're a rarity who manages not to end up like so many of these OnlyFans girls do, stalked, exploited, sexually assaulted, if you meet up with any of these guys, physically injured, with a bunch of STDs, abused, the consequences will still come in the form of karma down the road. When you're, an older, wiser, different person, maybe you want to have a family, maybe you want to have kids, maybe you want to move on from pornography into another life or career, and you can't really move on from this because it's all over the internet. And hundreds of thousands of strangers have seen you in these positions and seen your most intimate body parts. And now you have to live with that. And you have to live with the fact that you sold your body and you sold a fake version of your sexuality. It wasn't your real sexuality. You sold a version of your sexuality that you knew that these men wanted. It had nothing really to do with you and what you wanted. You had to live a double life in many ways. You had to perform in this way. And the thing that you were performing should have been something very intimate and special and pleasurable to you. And instead you turned it into a product. And I think that has a negative impact on your sense of value and your self-worth. And you sold that intimate experience, that intimate part of you, to millions of strangers on the internet. And that can only have a negative impact on your sense of value and self-worth. What I think that Sophie Rain is doing, I think she is incredibly unethical. I think what she's doing is bad, not just for her, but for all young women everywhere, because she's saying that what she's doing is female empowerment. And it's not. It's harmful and it's damaging and it's dangerous. And it is a form of selling your soul. And apparently the younger generations just think that's nothing at all. She's selling this idea of barely legal virgins in pornography, which contributes to the objectification and abuse of young girls by adult men, because they've learned that these girls want it. I saw one tweet saying, please stop calling prostitutes models. Thank you. This was in relation to a tweet that said, model Sophie Rain just revealed she made $43 million this year alone on OnlyFans. So this woman, Rachel Wilson, says, please stop calling prostitutes models. Thank you. And Sophie Rain responds and says, you can call me whatever I want. I will be laughing all the way to the bank. Okay, well, the bank isn't going to protect you. It's not going to protect your self-worth. It's not going to protect you from regretting this down the road. It's not going to protect your karma. I think that what Bonnie Blue and Sophie Rain are doing is horrific. I think it's unethical. I think it's going to result in their own trauma. They probably have a lot of trauma already because they're doing this in the first place, as well as the trauma of other girls and women. If you're selling horny shit on OnlyFans, you're part of the OnlyFans problem. Again, the men using OnlyFans are a problem. They're also disgusting. They're also unethical. They're also pathetic. But if you're on OnlyFans promoting this platform and making money from this platform, then you're part of the problem. And you can claim that it's an empowered choice because you're getting rich. But if you're getting rich off of something that you know is unethical, that you know is harmful, then I don't think you should be proud of that.